These are the stone giants of Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui. These gigantic statues are nearly 10 feet tall and weigh several tons. And yet somehow, the ancient people of Easter Island managed to move them across the island. But how? There are 887 of these stone giants scattered around the island. Most of them are found on the slopes and ridges of Rano Raraku, which is an extinct volcano in the central eastern part of the island. But there's not just one type of statue. There are 7 different types of moai that were created by the ancestors of today's indigenous population. The most common ones are the standing full-body statues. But there are also others, like the half-body moai, the moai with pukao hats, the moai that sit on platforms, the moai that have a ceremonial staff called a pata, the moai that hold a fish, and finally, the reclining moai. The question is, who made them and how? Historians believe that the first inhabitants of the island arrived from what is now Western Polynesia sometime before 1200 CE. They would have brought with them knowledge of new technologies, including more advanced tools made of metal. It was then that they began to exploit the natural resources of the island, including the red scoria that the statues are made of. The tough volcanic rock was quarried using stone tools, which were also used to shape the moai. A hammerstone would have been used to chip away at the stone, while a chisel made of harder rock would have been used to carve the finer details. To make each statue took an average of 4 to 5 months. But it wasn't just the statues that were built. Archaeologists have discovered other structures as well, such as villages, foundations for houses, platforms for the statues, which are stone ceremonial platforms that had human remains buried underneath. Arongo village, which was used by the Birdman cult, and the caves of Anakakanga and Anamango. All of this tells us that the island's population was fairly large, and that they lived there for many generations. But why did they stop making moai after 1400 CE? Well, according to the island's folklore, the moai were the children of the island. When the children left home, they had to be protected by a tapu or taboo system, which meant that no one could touch them. This prevented the moai from being finished and placed on their platforms. According to another legend, the moai were cursed. When a chief was killed, the moai stopped being built, and the island fell into chaos. Some of the unfinished statues were abandoned in the quarries, and others were even turned over. But there's another theory about why the moai building stopped so abruptly. It's called the ecological theory. Between 1280 and 1680, the population of Easter Island grew to around 17,500 people. But deforestation happened at the same time. As the trees disappeared, soil erosion increased, along with crop failure, famine, and social unrest. In fact, scientists have discovered evidence that during this time a civil war broke out on the island. All of this may have caused the production of the moai to stop. But here's where things get really interesting. How were these massive statues transported around the island? We know that they were moved because some of them were found far away from the quarry, up to 13 kilometers away, which is 8 miles. And we also know that they were moved before 1680, when the Dutch destroyed some of them thinking that they were idols. That means that they were moved between 1280 and 1680. And yet there are no roads on Easter Island, neither from the quarry to the ceremonial platform, nor from the villages to the coast. So how did they do it? One thing we know is that there weren't any wheeled vehicles on Easter Island, only boats and feet. In 1954, an American anthropologist named Paul Bann suggested that the moai were transported using a form of raft. He believed that a group of men would have attached ropes to the base of a moai and then slowly slid it down a slope into the sea. Once it reached the water, they would float it to its destination using a hook made of wood or stone, kind of like how ships are transported on a barge. Then they would lift the moai out of the water and put it in place. Bonn's theory is supported by some archaeological evidence. For example, there are traces of a dock on the shore of Anakana Bay, where archaeologists have found 19 moai, but there is also evidence that refutes his hypothesis. For instance, there are no signs that the moai were ever submerged. Marine biologists have studied the statues and concluded that if they had spent any time in the ocean, they would have been covered with barnacles. Also, the ropes that would have been needed to move a 12-ton statue would have had to been made of a very strong material like human hair. But there is no evidence that the islanders used human hair for anything else. Plus, they wouldn't have had enough hair to make the ropes. Finally, the transportation route proposed by Bonn is too long. The nearest quarry to Anakana Bay is 6 kilometers away, which is 3.7 miles. But all the moai found there came from the Rano Raraku quarry, which is 13 kilometers away, which is 8 miles. It would have taken at least 2 weeks for a raft to transport the statues along the rugged coastline. So then, how did they move these statues? Well, recent research has found another solution, one that doesn't require ropes, docks, or even rafts. The secret might lie in these grooves in the stone platforms. By putting the statues inside, scientists have discovered that they fit perfectly. And it turns out that these grooves are actually a system of grooves and rollers. When the island's inhabitants wanted to move a statue, they would lay the moai on its side, roll it along the island's rough terrain until they reach the coast and then roll it back again. This way, the grooves in the platforms would have acted as tracks for the statues, allowing them to be moved without any problems. But how do we know that this is the right explanation? Well, the researchers carried out several tests. First, they tried to replicate the tracks by carving grooves into a wooden platform. Then they placed a model of a moai on top of the platform and tried to roll it. To their surprise, the model didn't move, so they decided to make a second replica. But this time they used the exact measurements of the stone platform, and when they tried to roll the moai on this second track, it worked. The statue moved forward. The grooves and rollers are not the only piece of evidence that supports this idea. Scientists have also analyzed the wear patterns on the moai. They took samples from the legs and torsos of 3 different statues and compared them with samples from the supposed tracks. What they found was that the particles from the tracks were identical to the wear patterns on the statues. Not only that, but they also noticed something else. Some parts of the statues showed signs of polishing, which meant that they had been in contact with water. This fits perfectly with the hypothesis that the statues were transported along the coast. Another piece of evidence that scientists found was a narrow corridor that connected to platforms. It seemed as if the corridor had been purposely built to move the moai. After analyzing the corridor, they realized that the grooves on both platforms matched perfectly, meaning that the statues could be moved from one platform to the next. But this raises another question. Why are the moai found so far away from the quarry? Well, the answer might lie in a series of misfortunes that befell the island. Between 1560 and 1680, 3 major droughts occurred. These events may have caused the population to abandon their homes and flee to the coast in search of food. During their exodus, they may have taken the moai with them, using them as a support while they traveled, or perhaps hiding behind them for protection. Unfortunately, these statues could not save them from the slave traders who arrived on the island in 1680. But that is a story for another video. What do you think of this new theory? Let me know in the comments below. Also, remember to leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching. See you next time.